For more than 45 years, the United States and Iran have been locked in one of the absolute most intense, complex rivalries on the modern geopolitical stage. We're talking about a true crucible of conflict here, one marked by crushing economic sanctions, devastating cyber attacks, high-profile assassinations, and direct military strikes that pretty much constantly keep the world on edge. I am thrilled you're here for this explainer, because today we're going to unpack the real history behind this hostility, and we'll be using documentary evidence to map the whole thing out visually.
But what's actually driving this seemingly endless feud? We have to put our detective hats on for a second and ask, is energy the true cause? Like, is this entire thing just a massive struggle over who controls the black gold flowing out of the Middle East?
Or maybe it's fundamentally about weapons of mass destruction. Are we looking at a terrifying arms race driven by the global panic of a nuclear-armed Iran?
Or perhaps it's all about Israel and that incredibly intricate web of regional proxy groups. Honestly, the truth is, it's a profound geopolitical mystery, and I invite you to solve it with me today as we look at the facts. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. 1. Friendship to revolution. 2. The geopolitics of oil. 3. Proxies in regional politics. 4. The nuclear disagreement. And 5. Two different perspectives.
Section 1. Friendship to revolution, the historical shift.
It might seem totally unbelievable today, but these two nations weren't always enemies. Actually, from the 1950s through the 1970s, right in the middle of the Cold War, Iran was a really close U.S. ally. Under the rule of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the U.S. just poured in investments and military support, viewing Iran as a vital strategic partner. But on the ground, many Iranians strongly opposed the Shah's rule. And this brilliantly illustrates how quickly things can change, because that domestic unrest completely boiled over in 1979 with the Islamic Revolution and the return of Ayatollah Khomeini. Literally overnight, that alliance was dead. This culminated in the harrowing U.S. Embassy hostage crisis, where American diplomats were held for 444 days. It remains one of the most defining, traumatic moments in modern U.S. diplomatic history, officially severing ties and setting the stage for the decades of animosity we see today.
Section 2. The geopolitics of oil. The economic battlefield.
So, Iran sits on some of the absolute largest oil and gas reserves on the planet. But it's not just about what's in the ground, it's about how it actually gets out. Iran borders the Persian Gulf and the critical Strait of Hormuz, which is essentially the main choke point for the global energy market. A massive percentage of the world's oil flows through this incredibly narrow passageway. So when tensions flare up between the US and Iran, it is definitely not just a localized political dispute. It directly impacts global energy markets. To put it simply, stability in the Persian Gulf dictates the price of oil. That means this conflict literally affects the cost of gas at your local station and the health of the entire world economy. The stakes here are incredibly high for all of us.
Section 3. Proxies and regional politics. The Middle East chessboard.
Because the U.S. and Iran rarely engage in direct conventional warfare, they rely on proxy conflicts. So the crucial point is, this is an indirect war where major powers use third parties, regional actors, or allied groups to fight on their behalf. It's basically a way of striking at your enemy without officially declaring war.
Let's look at the actual layout of this proxy war, because it's like a giant puzzle. The arenas for these clashes include Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and the wider Middle East. The key actors are deeply, deeply polarized. On one side, you have the US and its staunch support for Israel. On the other, Iran strictly opposes Israel and provides heavy backing to regional groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. This leads to just a constant, simmering boil of regional violence. A major flashpoint happened in 2020 when the U.S. killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. That was a massive escalation that triggered recent, really intense exchanges between the U.S., Iran, and these allied groups. It's a very messy, interconnected map where one single move triggers a dozen countermoves.
Section 4. The nuclear disagreement, technology versus proliferation.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is it reveals a fundamental disconnect with two totally parallel narratives. On one hand, Iran's official claim is that they're pursuing nuclear technology strictly for peaceful, civilian purposes, like generating power. But on the exact opposite side, we see the global fear. The United States and its allies deeply worry that this same technology and infrastructure is secretly a pathway to building nuclear weapons. This strict binary, peaceful power versus apocalyptic weapon, is the absolute root of an incredibly tense diplomatic standoff. Because of this fear, we see a continuous tug-of-war. The international community demands rigorous inspections to monitor Iranian nuclear sites. We've seen the creation of incredibly complex, yet super fragile nuclear agreements aimed at capping Iran's capabilities in exchange for sanctions relief.
But as we've seen in recent years, these treaties can easily fall apart. And when they do, it leads to ongoing diplomatic disputes and escalating tensions that immediately threaten global stability.
Section 5. Two different perspectives. The truth behind the conflict.
The reality is that this rivalry is sustained by an incredibly dense, overlapping web. Think about it. It's historical betrayals, the fight for regional influence, deep security concerns on both sides, control over vital energy routes, that stubborn nuclear disagreement, and broader global alliances. You can't just remove one of these elements without the others keeping the hostility alive. They all feed into one another, creating this huge, self-sustaining cycle of distrust.
Let's move to and see how this builds into the final, most vital piece of the puzzle. Acknowledging these differing viewpoints neutrally. Neither side views the situation the exact same way. From the United States' perspective, its actions are entirely justified as a means of protecting its forces and allies in the region and, critically, preventing nuclear proliferation. However, from Iran's perspective, their actions are justified as defending their own national sovereignty, securing their regional interests, and actively opposing what they see as unwarranted outside interference. The documentary sources make it very, very clear. Understanding both of these perspectives, without necessarily endorsing either of them, is absolutely required if you want to truly understand the mechanics of this conflict.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. The relationship between America and Iran remains one of the world's most important and volatile geopolitical rivalries. With everything we've looked at today, from the historical wounds of 1979 to the ongoing proxy wars and those tense nuclear disputes, how will the future of this 45-year rivalry ultimately shape global security? Whether tensions eventually boil over into direct conflict or diplomacy miraculously succeeds, the outcome will absolutely dictate the future of the Middle East and, by extension, the entire world. Keep an eye on those headlines and think back to the map we drew today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.